Hello and welcome to another video from Another Knitted Thing. Today we are going to be looking into how I made this jumper, which is for a friend. It's commissioned for a friend, and basically the whole process of it, and essentially how it ended up being one of the most testing jumper situations of my whole knitting career so far. So I started off knitting a sample for the tensions, and I knitted two. So we're going to be focusing mainly over this area where there's like a little seal pattern, and you can see that there are actually quite a lot of floats on the backhand side. That is because I've got quite an area where I don't have a pattern going into the knit, so it's quite a blank space, but the machine will actually struggle with this because of the floats. So I decided to put in a bit of a pattern to kind of help the knitting and to make it a little bit cleaner. However, I wasn't so much of a fan of this, so just wanted to tidy it up. So this is going to be the process of how I tidied it up. I did the pattern on Designer Knit, which is a program, a software where you can program in your knitting patterns and also your shapes for what you want to knit. And basically, it sorts out the pattern for you rather than a punch card. And it also tells you the shaping ratios and the shaping kind of increases and decreases that you need to do at the same time. So there I was just clearing up the pattern and making it a little bit more like a bird's eye over those areas where I've got the seals. And now I've opened up the actual patterning bit for the shape, and I'm just going to alter the front to make it a back piece. And then I'm also going to draft out the sleeve sizes as well. So this was a basic crew neck jumper. And it was commissioned for her to fit her measurements, and it's also got a bit of a set-in sleeve as well. Just as a personal note, I'm kind of not so much of a fan of like that really boxy shape. I like a little bit of shaping in with my knits because I feel that it just makes the fit a little bit better, and it also just increases kind of that sort of feel of the jumper. You know, it's not kind of oversized and boxy. It's much more fitted to you, and it's more considered for the shape. So I've just been placing the pattern pieces into the actual Fair Isle pattern that I'll be working with, just to make sure they all fit and just to make sure that they all align, and just to kind of also get a nice match on the sleeves as it goes onto the body. So I'm just checking the tension here with the length of the jumper as well. We did a fitting, and one pattern repeat on the jumper actually seemed to fit really, really well. So I was just double checking that one length of the repeat still fitted on the draft of the pattern piece. Here I've just changed to my ribber attachment. I have taken out my plating feeder, and I'm just setting up the rib with a 2x2 rib structure to get going. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I always find it really daunting just starting a new pattern, especially when you cast on so many needles to begin with, and just to kind of get those first few rows going, even though it's probably one of the easiest parts of the whole knit. Certainly in this experience, the rib was the easiest part of the whole knit, but I still find it a little bit daunting just to kind of start that new process and start a jumper going. So here I am just working the rib. And once that rib had been knitted on both the beds, I then transferred all the needles over onto the back bed or the main bed of the knitting machine. My carriage was on the right-hand side. I processed the pattern through Designer Knit, get it going, and then set 2 yarns up into my carriage for Fair Isle. And this is always the first row of the pattern. And that first row of the pattern, again, I find even more daunting than anything else, because even though you've put so much effort into that rib, you don't want to mess it up on that first pass of the carriage. So you can see here, and this is a little bit of foreshadowing, I think, for this whole project. I started to have some problems with the yarns. I'm working with a 4-yarn tension arm, and I think they're really quite annoying. I think I need to change over to just using 2 tension arms for 2 yarns, because I'd already started having problems. My yarns were getting caught, going up from the cone. It was nothing on the comb, because as you saw earlier on, I wound all of the balls onto cones. I was just having issues with the tension, with that kind of tension spring getting caught. I also then noticed that I was having issues over on that far right-hand side. I had dropped a few stitches already, and it was just becoming a bit of a nightmare already. And you can see sort of the speed that I'm going at, it's actually really not very quick at all. And even though I've got 6 colours going into this jacquard or fair owl, changing colours all of the time and then just putting 2 colours in at the same time, I was still having issues. My carriage was getting stuck. And basically I was just having problems from the get-go with this jumper. And I really should have kind of realised that this was not going to be an easy knit, and I probably should have given myself a little bit more time than I actually had to knit this jumper. But my deadline was quite short. This project had already overrun by far too long, and I just needed to get it done. So I spent a lot of time unraveling rows, resetting the carriage, going back through designer knit, and finally getting to a point where I was then working with the neckline and the shoulder. So here I am working the neckline. So the neckline are those needles in the hold position in the center, and they're just being held. And then I'm currently just working that right hand shoulder using partial knit and shaping the neckline at the same time. I prefer to use partial knit on the shoulders because it gives a really nice edge that you then link together. You don't have this sort of step edges what you can get when you're casting off stitches. Instead, you're just bringing the needles out into the hold position, and then you do one final row when you get to the end. And just hope that it doesn't fall off, which it did for the second time in a row. So I took the time to rehang the stitches where I found them, put them back up onto the machine, take it back a couple of rows, and then go again for that side of the shoulder. And again, I had to then sort of re-find, as you can see, it's all a complete and utter mess. I had to re-find that pattern, get it back to where I need it to be on designer knit, and then once I was happy, re-go again to knit that shoulder. So just having a bit of a nightmare with this bit. It all completely fell off on that very last row. I tried saving the stitches, but for some reason this alpaca is really slippery, so the stitches are just unraveling as I'm trying to save them. I'm going through the process of finding the stitches, rehanging them, and taking all of this shaping back to where we were before I started the neckline and the left hand shoulder. So it's really annoying because it genuinely feels like everything that could have gone wrong with this back piece at the minute has. It was originally going to be the front piece, but then I kind of figured I'm having too many problems with it. I want to make it easy for myself, so let's do less shaping for the neckline rather than the full neck shaping. Also because I'm not quite sure about the size of this at the minute. There's been an indication that this size is coming out smaller than it should, which is also really strange because I double and triple checked my tensions before I started knitting it this morning. When I got to kind of the armhole, I measured it on the machine, which never do, but I measured it on the machine and it was actually smaller when stretched with the weight than the measurement on the pattern, which I find really bizarre because it should be longer and I should be thinking, oh, this is coming out too long. Now it's looking like an all right size, but we'll have to see once it's off the machine. This is going to be a long day. So it's finally off the machine. It came off twice, so third time lucky at getting it off. Size wise, I'm umming and ahhing. So I remember when we did a fitting, I remember that this sample was the length of the body, and this sample, it was 1 repeat and it fitted really nicely and really well. That was the length that we wanted. This is a little bit longer than 1 repeat. It's 1 repeat and then it goes on and just starts the next, which is fine. We are pretty much there on the length if I were to pin it out on the pattern. The only problem is this is straight off the machine and the knit likes to shrink up a bit. I've stretched it out and that kind of tends to then help the stitches relax a little bit more after they've been stretched by the weights. We are then hitting the measurements pretty much bang on. I'm not sure what it would do when it's washed. I can't remember because, silly me, didn't measure this one to see if there was much shrinkage, but I can then wash it and block it to the actual size that I want it to be. This was the base jumper that we tried on as a guide. So this is a large. We didn't want it any longer than that. And when I lie this next to this is longer. So it's shorter than the pattern, but longer than the sample jumper. So I'm really confusing myself here. I think I'm going to leave it. I need to get it done by Friday. So I think I'm going to leave it. It's taken me 5 hours to knit a front of a jumper. 5 hours is an insane amount of time. For me anyway. I can normally knit a whole jumper in a day. This one's just being awful. Hopefully, because now I know how the back reacts, the front will be a bit quicker. And I know the points to look out for. This bit's looking really nice. Is that a needle? Right, I think I'll get the front done and then see where I'm at and see if I can get a sleeve done. Oh, this is a nightmare. So I've had a rethink. I've come back to the drawing board because after looking at that back piece, the bit around the seals that were kind of like dotted to make sure that the yarn doesn't kind of gape in between the seals. I really don't like the dots. It's been a point for me that I've never really been happy with it. And I'm trying to do something else. And there was a project that I did for Christmas. I had the same sort of problem at one point when I was working on that project, and I ended up making these sort of little star things. So I'm implementing them in this as well, just making sure that I'm not floating over too many needles. And I think this looks a lot nicer. So I'm going to go for this instead. So I think that makes it a lot prettier. Maybe not prettier, but like a lot less harsh on the eye. I think it's more in keeping with the rest of the design. So I have decided that jumper, I'm going to take it home and I'm going to rip it back tonight. That's my project for this evening. Right now I'm going to knit this as a front and see where that takes us. Take 2. So then hopefully tonight I've got the front done, hopefully 2 sleeves, if not 1 sleeve, and then tomorrow I will do the second sleeve, re-knit the back, and I'll know what's going on, so it should be quicker, and then put it all together and do the neckline to then wash it tomorrow night, dry it on my heater here and block it to give to on Friday. You plan. So just a quick update on this. I've managed to do the front and finally been able to do the back as well. And the back actually went really, really smoothly. That only took me 2 hours compared to the front. However, I fucked up. I got the 2 colours inverted on this section compared to here, which is really, really annoying. So it means that I'm going to have to rip all of that half back, stick it on the machine at that row where the white changes into the orange, and go again. So yeah, I'm knitting sleeves at the minute because I was just like, I just need a break from this bit. And I'm also, once that's done, I'm going to create a bit of a ladder back on the back over these sections because it just neatens it up a lot more. But yeah, really fucking annoying. This is basically turning into a video of how not to knit a jumper. Literally everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. We're slowly getting there, but my deadline is tomorrow evening. And this is really going to be pushing it. So we'll see. Day 2. That back piece I knitted yesterday, I frogged it, rewound all of the yarn onto the cones, and also yesterday before I left, I started again, got up to a relatively good point, and then realised I fucked up. So I took it off, started rehanging it before I left. I then got really tired and just decided to call it a day. Got the rest of the rehang to do, just ripping back 10-12 rows, and then we're going again. Positive mental attitude is what I have. That will get me through today. It needs to be done today. So this is the process of me then rehanging those stitches back up onto the needles so I can rip it back and re-go again. For those of you who've got keen eyes, yes, this is not the part where I went wrong yesterday. This is a completely different part. So yes, I messed up twice. Both times I had got the wrong colours, so I had to take it off the machine, put it back on again, rip it back and go again twice. Very annoying. The other issue that I was having was that some needles were knitting both colours at the same time. So I had to manually go back, undo that stitch and then re-knit it in exactly the right colour it should be. Somehow both yarns were getting caught up in the needles when I was taking them across. One was then creating, so it was then just knitting both colours, which could be seen on the wrong side, which was just really frustrating. It turned out that it was my sponge bar, which I replaced it from a different machine that I had, and that seemed to work a little bit better. So a million years later, or how it felt like, I finally got both the front and the back and the 2 sleeves and the neck piece off the machine, and I could start linking them. So my hand crank linker is the best gauge that I have for my domestic machine. So that is what I'm using for this. And I also did a sandwich trim where I then worked both sides of the neck rib as live stitches and did a point-to-point linking. So this is just me going back over with that front side of the neck rib and putting every single stitch onto the linking points. And you can see that I've got a nice section of waste yarn there, which is just indicating exactly where those live stitches are. And that just gives a really, really nice finish to the neck rib. And it also means that I don't have any bulk in there, and it's a nice folded neck rib as well. So it gives a really nice finish to the jumper. It is also the finish of the neck rib that I tend to prefer to work with. And I actually really enjoy doing point-to-point linking. I think it's really quite therapeutic, and once you get used to it, it really doesn't take too much time. So this is unraveling the waste yarn, and then I got to linking point to point. I didn't actually haven't shown actually so much of the construction process of this jumper. This has been more kind of how not to knit a jumper. The rest of the time it's actually been pretty easy, especially the construction side. But you can see, and just to give kind of a note about this yarn, it is very slippery. Here I'm putting it back up onto my linker, and you can see it just keeps falling off of its own accord. This is Drops alpaca yarn, which I then put onto cones. So it is quite cheap. It is apparently 100% alpaca. Not quite sure how much I believe that, but the label says it, so fine. But it is very, very soft. It's incredibly nice to wear, but it is very, very slippery yarn, which means when you're trying to work with it, whether a stitch drops or whether you're trying to put it onto a linker, it does kind of fall off. And that just must be the process of what they've done to the yarn to make it really, really soft. It could also just be the yarn itself. That I'm not sure about. I'm not a yarn expert. I'm just a knitter. So this is the construction of the body on my 12 gauge linker. And I just thought for ease and for speed, I will put this through my 12 gauge linker because it's not a hand crank. It is an industrial machine just to get things done and just to get things finished. And this is the other side. Similarly, exactly like a sewing machine, you work a linker by putting the right sides together all the way across. And you have this circular drum, so you can just continue linking for as long as you need. So you could work with a huge long piece. You just put it all on the linking pins, right side facing you. Then you put the second side on as well. Again, right side facing. So right sides facing together. It's essentially just like a sewing machine, but for knit. And it creates a chain stitch rather than a standard knitting stitch. And that chain stitch just gives a little bit more stretch over that seam. So it's not going to be super, super tight when it's worn. And this is the process of putting the sleeves on. So I went up to one half of the sleeve, right up to the shoulder point. And then I just sort of worked my way around because they are set in sleeves. So they are a little bit trickier to put in. You can't just put that flat seam on. You do have to kind of ease it in and work your way around. So I do half, and then I take off the half that was linked to then be able to put on the second half. And then once that's done, because you put sleeves in flat, you can then do the whole side seam and the sleeve as well. Once that was done, I then spent some time just sewing in the ends, and I did a little bit of ladder back through some of the areas with the most amount of floats. But I have not shown that process, and potentially I will then do a video about how I manually do ladder back in the future. And the jumper was then ready to steam and ready to give to my friend, and this was the finished product. So I didn't have time to wash it, but I gave it a really good steam, as mentioned before, and this is the final thing. Yes, there are still a couple of little mistakes in there, and for those keen eyes, you might find another element where I might have gone wrong, but I'm actually really happy with it. The whole process was a little bit traumatic, however, and it was a challenge from my machine and yarn-wise, but I'm really happy with the result. It's got a lot of character, and it goes to show that machine knitting doesn't always go the way that you plan it.
What do you think?
So thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for knitting tips, tricks, techniques, and more projects, failures, and ones at work, all coming soon.